Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at this Hornby Saint class loco that has been sent to me by a chap called Stephen, who says he's inherited it from a family member and it's been in the loft for 3 years. Indeed, the date on the service sheet here puts it at 1994. This is just the generic service sheet that comes with all Hornby locos of the time. So we'll keep that to one side and we'll get this loco out of the blister packaging, which surprisingly has kept its translucent colour and has not yellowed badly like many of these have done from the mid-90s. Looking at this Saint loco, it is in absolutely stunning external condition. However, I'm told it's a non-runner, so we're going to have a look and see if we can bring it back to life. Indeed, a battery test there proves that it's not showing any signs of life whatsoever. Although it did just jump then, it now won't work at all. So I assume that having had years of non-use, it just needs a good service. Unclipping the tender body shell gives you the access to the normal ring-filled motor. And just looking at this is the old grease that's congealed that was put on the model when it was new in the factory almost 30 years ago. That is grim. We're going to have to remove all of this. Now, this proved to be slightly difficult to get out of the tender frame, as there's a plastic insert piece which the tender hook goes onto, but with some gentle persuasion the model actually does come apart. Now, I've taken many of these locos apart over the years, tender drive ring-filled models, and what's about to happen has never happened to me before. The wheels are a push fit onto their axles in these tender drive models, and they usually come off with ease. But this time, upon trying to release the wheels, the axle had actually got metal fatigue and had snapped. It looks to be a brass axle and it had snapped off in the wheel bearing. But looking at this, like I said, I think this has got some form of metal fatigue, as just by bending it slightly with my pliers, it snaps again. So I'm going to have to get a new rear axle for this. And it may explain why that axle was so stiff and wouldn't turn in the axle hole. So I'm going to remove the cogs now. This model is fitted with one of the aluminium worm gears here, which can work loose over time, although this one seems to be okay at the moment and has not worked loose. So I didn't feel the need to remove it and replace it with a brass one at this time. These drive wheels, I was expecting axle problems with these, but these actually came off with a gentle force. They came off okay, just as I'd expect from this sort of model. So that's how they should come off. They should just gently pull apart. Whereas that brass one there just snapped. To remove the brushes and springs, I'm going to remove these keepers by gently undoing that screw. One of the brush springs come out and the brush falls out onto the workbench. However, when I undid the other one, the brass retainer was covered in congealed oil and the brush itself was stuck in the holder. So obviously this oil and grease has seeped onto the commutator over time, which may explain why it wasn't running. So I'm gently going to unclip the motor faceplate there, which pops off, and the other brush is indeed stuck in the motor faceplate with a lot of old lubrication. You can see it there, and I can scrape it off and wipe it on a cotton bud. It really wasn't very nice at all. This model hasn't ran in many years. So I'm just having a look there, that seems to be turning okay. And now I'm going to polish up the commutator, get all this old congealed oil off it, first by using a cotton bud and methylated spirits to remove most of the dirt. I then polish the face up with a fiberglass pencil, as you've probably seen countless times in the past. And then with a shaved cocktail stick, I am going to clean the gaps out in the commutator faceplates, as any build-up of dirt and carbon within these will cause short circuits and can lead to very bad running and even the motor burning out in extreme cases. So that's now shining like a new pin. I'm going to now clean the motor faceplate and get all that horrible congealed grease off there from 30 years ago. I will re-lubricate this when I go to put it back together. But look at it, it just comes off, and now I've done that, it is shining like new. So I'm confident that I can clip that back in place, and I'm going to reinsert the brushes and the springs. Now I got a new brush for that side, as the one that had all the oil and that congealed on it had showed signs that it was starting to crack. The carbon had gone a bit funny, so I replaced that. And then these brass retainers here, I mean, that wasn't quite clean enough for my liking, so I'm just going to polish the end there with the fiberglass pencil, and you'll see on the desk how shiny that piece of brass is, and that will ensure good electrical conductivity. So holding that in place with one finger, I'm going to reinsert this resistor or the interference suppressor, whatever it is, and then reinsert the screw and gently tighten that up. And the same was done on the other side to hold the brushes and springs in place. I'm going to add a tiny amount of oil to that bearing there when it finally comes out of the oil pot. Give it a test with the battery over the terminals, and the motor is spinning lovely. So I'm pretty confident that the dirt and the congealed oil was what was stopping this from running. So I'm going to put a small amount of silicone grease on the motor cog spindles there, and then reattach the cogs, which were all extremely clean. There was no burrs or anything on them. No grease on these cogs, so I'm just going to refit all these into place and then replace the brass keeping piece there, which clips into the actual motor casting, just like so. I'm just going to make sure that all fits in nicely. Give it a turn with finger pressure and the battery, and everything is spinning nicely. So now I'm going to reattach the two good axles. I'm just going to put a tiny amount of oil in those brass bearing sleeves there, just so that when the axles slide in, they are well lubricated, although not over lubricated. And then the wheels are a press fit on the axles, and once they're both done, I test the gauges with a back-to-back digital caliper just to make sure they are sitting at the correct gauge of 14.3 millimeters in this case. So here I am, I've got a brand new axle for the wheels here, and I'm just going to tap it into place on one wheel with this ball peen hammer, ensuring that it goes in nice, straight and level. And then once that's in, that looked a bit more forceful than it actually was, so don't worry too much about that. Once it's actually in place, again, small amount of oil in the holes there for the axles to ensure that it spins nicely. And the centre axle was then put back together, and it spins nice and freely, and I'm just checking there to make sure the wheel is square. And again, once this was pushed on, it was checked for back-to-back measurements with my digital calipers that I showed you in one of the Aldi and Lidl videos a couple of weeks ago. Although it's probably months now, to be honest. So I'm going to refit the motor to the tender chassis plate there. It goes underneath that plastic clip thing and then clips in place at the back. Refit the wire from the tender draw pin there, and then give it a quick battery test just to ensure that everything's working, which it is at this point. You can see there that the wheels are turning nicely. Tender body shell put on and clips back into place, no problem. So now I'm going to take a look, when I just dust that off there, at the loco part of the model, although I don't envisage any problems with this. This is just a general service on this loco, just to get it back into running order. There doesn't seem to be much dust and fluff all over this. So taking the loco body shell off there, just as I thought, everything is nice and clean in here. The wheels are slightly oxidised, so need a clean. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a small amount of oil on those leading drive axles, just so that they turn a little bit freer. As they're very dry at the moment, there isn't any lubrication on them at all. So using this handheld oil dispenser, just put a tiny amount of oil on each of the axles. And then just clean off a little bit of the excess there. And then, yeah, they run lovely and freely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reattach the body shell, as I find it easier to clean the wheels with it inverted upside down in my loco cradle. And with the body shell on, it's a lot easier to hold it in that and clean the wheels. So the body shell is held in place with the front clip and that rear screw. So now it's upside down, I'm just going to turn the wheels by hand, just to polish the wheel treads up. You can see there's minimal dirt coming off these onto that cotton bud. Like I said, I don't think this loco has had much use in the past. It is in almost mint condition. The loco and the box, so it has been stored in somebody's loft, stored very well. The front pony wheels were given a polish up with the cotton bud and meths as well, before adding a small amount of lubrication in there, because again, they're metal parts in a metal bearing, so they do need some form of lubrication. The couplings you'll notice are missing on this model, but Stephen ensures me that he has these at home and will refit these when he gets the model back through the mail. So I'm just going to polish up the tender pin there just to remove any oxidisation and ensure good conductivity. And then with a battery, I'm going to run a cotton bud over the tender wheels just to clean them up, although again there's minimal dirt on these, so they didn't really need, they do need a clean to remove any dust, but they weren't overly too bad. So now back to the track test. Put the loco on first and connect the tender up. And then this is where things started to go a little bit wrong. The model was trying to run there, as you saw, and then it died again. There's nothing at all happening with this model. So I'm a little bit puzzled now as to what's happening. So it wouldn't move on the track, and it wouldn't move, and the motor appears to have seized up. It wouldn't turn with finger pressure, although as you just saw when I cleaned the wheels, it was turning. So I stripped the model all back down again, ensured that there was no short circuits, the wires were all correct, and it just wouldn't turn. It was seized solid. There was something had gone amiss inside the motor itself, and initially I couldn't fathom out why. So I took the gears off, thinking it might have been the gears locked, but no, that wouldn't work. And then all of a sudden it burst into life. Just as I wiggled the armature there, it started to burst into life. So I don't know whether there was a bit of swarf or a tiny bit of metal that had got in there and it had jammed it. But then it started to work again. So I refit the gears and the gear keeper, refit the wire and the tender body shell, and the loco then actually started to work as it should. I'm not sure why it stopped. The only thing I can fathom is there must have been a burr or something inside the motor housing that I'd missed. But as you can see now, this Saint Catherine was now running quite nicely. So it was only a short trash to track this time. It was just a service and a demonstration of how to get a loft model back into running order that hasn't ran for probably 25, if not nearly 30 years. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please send me an email at the email address that's on screen now, dansmodelrailways@gmail.com, and we'll have a look at getting it sent over, and who knows, it may feature in an episode all of its own. I'm going to get this Saint Catherine back to Stephen now, so thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you again in the next video. Bye for now.